Hey, hello, and welcome to episode number 7. My name is Hugo, and I'm the host of this podcast in which I interview people for you to learn more about how to create better architecture, because I believe that the construction industry has the power to create a better world where humanity and nature can not only coexist but flourish together. Today's episode is about how do we reduce our energy consumption in buildings, and also how do we create a healthier environment for the occupant. So we can do it in many different ways, obviously, but one of it is known as the Passivhaus Standard. And the Passivhaus Standard is, I would say, currently one of the best standards that exists when it comes to building energy consumption, and more specifically on heating. So what is this standard? What are the challenges, the opportunity? Is it more expensive? Can we use it in every climate? How hard is it to design? And there is a lot more question around this Passivhaus Standard. But today we are lucky enough to have a conversation with Matt Bridgestock. He is currently one of the directors of John Gilbert Architects, where he has completed several Passivhaus projects, and he was also a certified Passivhaus designer. So I guess he would have some answer for us. So as usual, cup of tea, biscuit, and listen. So Matt, can you give us a wee introduction about yourself? Who are you? What are you doing?
Okay, so my name is Matt Bridgestock. I'm an architect and based in Glasgow. I'm a director at John Gilbert Architects. We're a practice in Glasgow. There's 17 of us. We do quite a lot of social housing and other good community, low energy, sustainable kind of stuff. We do that all over Scotland. And we've got a few projects in England now, so that's us.
Great. For how long is like the company is there in Scotland?
So
How old is it?
the company was founded by John Gilbert in 1992. So next year will be 30 years,
Oh,
which is excellent.
yeah,
Yep.
quite a long time ago. That's great. So you are a passive house certified designer. I saw that on your profile, LinkedIn profile. So can you give us just a wee introduction of what is the passive house standard?
So the Passivhaus Standard was developed about 30 years ago, coincidentally, actually, in Germany by the Passivhaus Institute, and it's basically it was developed by a physicist who was frustrated by the fact that adding insulation to his house didn't necessarily mean that his energy bills had come down. And being a physicist, he was quite frustrated by that and set about, and an academic as well, it set about trying to work out why that was, and develop a whole area of building science around low energy buildings. And through that, they found various things about insulation and air tightness and thermal comfort of people living in houses, and developed the idea of how can you make a house that's got really low energy, and develop some rules, developed a standard, and that became the Passivhaus Standard. And it was really developed around comfort first, and then energy. And you're making a comfortable house using as little energy as possible, and what can building physics do? And there's been quite a lot of them built. I think there's around about 40,000 across projects across Europe, and more worldwide. There's more than 1,000 in the UK. It's probably closer to 2,000 now. I would imagine. That's 2 or 3 years ago, that statistic. But it's So it's first of all, it's a comfort standard. So how can you feel comfortable in your house? But all of the benchmarks are measured in energy. So it's a really low energy building. The house has to use less than 15 kilowatts per square meter per year, or on the coldest days, use less than 10 watts of heat to keep it warm and comfortable. So there's two matrix, and you choose between them. It needs to be airtight, and there's a standard for that. It needs to be really well insulated, and there's a standard for that. It needs to not overheat in the summer, but you do need to be able to get the heat from the sun in the winter to keep the house warm. So there's a standard for that. It needs to be well ventilated, because that's part of being comfortable and a part of living in an airtight building. So there's a standard for the ventilation that you need to meet, and there's various different issues around that. And if you do all of that, then you only really need a very small heating system to keep the house warm, even in Scotland. So that's the Passivhaus Standard without a whole load of numbers, if that helps.
Okay, and Scotland is the worst case scenario in term of weather, so that's great.
Well, it can be, yeah. There are some good bits of Scotland for Passivhaus, and there's some pretty bad bits. So yeah.
So what are the main benefits of the Passivhaus Standard for a client point of view?
Well, there's quite a few. I think from an architect's point of view, I'll go from an architect's point of view first of all. The thing that we're really keen on is we've done quite a lot of monitoring of our buildings and found that what we thought the energy performance and the performance for the inhabitants kind of comfort was going to be wasn't always what we got. And that really annoyed us. We wanted to, if we said we were going to get this, then we would get it. And we did a lot of work on trying to bring that performance gap, the gap between what we thought the performance was going to be and what it was, to bring that down. And Passivehaus is part of that. It's part of the tools that we use to do that. And the calculation method that Passivehaus uses is really good for that. And if you can do that, then you can start to do things like bring the energy performance down to something that can give you really low energy bills and really low carbon emissions, and can start to look at eliminating fuel poverty completely from our new build building stock and our existing building stock, which is a really powerful thing to do. From the tenant's point of view, they're getting something, and the user's point of view, they're getting something that's really healthy and comfortable to be in. Now, that's pretty difficult to quantify. I can see, Hugo, you're sat there in a big jumper. How do you quantify that? How do you value that? That's, and it's pretty robust to operate. And you're also getting something that's got really good construction quality, and you're getting that kind of guarantee from all of the testing that's done through the project. So the user's getting something. We're able to offer more certainty in our design, and the owner of the building is getting a really good quality building. So I think all of those things together, and also all of that is proven now time and time again in practice. So all of that together gives a really compelling argument, in my view, for the Passivhaus Standard. Okay.
And so what are the main challenges that you're facing while designing Passivhaus?
The challenges, there's quite a few challenges. I mean, quite a lot of it is around the fact that as an industry, that as the construction industry, quality and performance are not things that are necessarily automatically included in kind of clients' requirements. Mm-hmm. There's things like, we want a high quality house, well, define a high quality building, and things like that. The definition's not there, and so on. I think there's a lot of techniques. Certainly, when I started this about 10 years ago, there were a lot of techniques that contractors found very difficult to understand and to cost and evaluate. Can I just stop that just 2 seconds?
Yeah, sure. Yeah, go for it. Hey, that's me, Hugo, during the editing phase of this episode. So Matt had to go answer the door, I guess. And I told him I was just going to edit it during the editing process, but I didn't. So I'm going to take this opportunity just to let you know there is a wee bonus at the end for people who are doing this Icebox challenge for the COP26. I asked Matt what are his best advice if you want to do the best design, the best Passivhaus design. So it's at the real end of this episode. Don't miss it. And now let's go back with Matt.
Do we need to start that bit again? Sorry about that.
That's all right. That's all right. Don't worry. You can start again, or you keep going and I edit
You
it
edit it out.
later. Yeah.
Sorry. Yeah, I think
That was the challenge.
Yeah, I think when we started looking at Passivehaus it's 11 years ago now. It's early 2010. Started looking at it that a lot of the techniques weren't mainstream in construction. A lot of things about air tightness and your really thick insulation, that and getting all of those things right weren't mainstream. So actually, over the last 10 years, quite a lot of contractors, quite a lot of people in the construction industry have kind of upskilled to understand that. The other thing is that when we started this, there was only about 4 window suppliers in Scotland that could supply a Passivhaus quality window. Now there must be at least 50 window suppliers coming into Scotland. So you go from a very niche market to being able to get something from most mainstream window manufacturers will do you a window that meets the standard. So things like that. You're building a Passivhaus was it still is a challenge in some respects, but it's not the same challenge it was 5 or 7 years ago. That's they're different challenges. And there's things around the way that we build buildings across the whole of the UK, certainly, but there's particular ways that we build buildings in Scotland that make challenges. Timber kit, how do you make a timber kit airtight? You can make it really airtight, but it's not inherently airtight, if you like. Quite a lot of bigger buildings use a lot of steel. How do you get a steel building that is also not got any thermal bridges? That's quite a complicated thing to work out. And again, not impossible, but you've got to work that. You've got to work that out.
Okay.
The contractors you've got and the steel manufacturers and, so...
to put everyone on board to think about it and find solutions.
Yeah, and the other thing I think is certainly on bigger projects, and we're working on... we've got around 25,000 square meters of Passivhaus construction under design and construction at the moment. So, bigger projects, the issue for me is really around communication and getting the whole team on board and understanding the exact thing that needs to be done, because there's often subtle changes away from traditional practice. Oh, you've got to do this a bit better or a bit different. And if you don't catch all of them, then someone who is relatively minor in the whole scheme of the building can really have a big impact on the Passivhaus certification, if you like. Okay. So it's I think communication and teamwork is a big challenge, but it's also a real opportunity. If you can get people on board, then you can get some genuinely brilliant things done. So
okay. So how is it perceived, like, from the general public? Like, do you have a lot of clients asking for that, or is like more you suggesting to use Passivhaus?
So we've done a small number of one-off house projects for private clients. They tend to be people who have some money and some opportunity, and and they are often quite well educated in kind of environmental matters, energy matters, carbon emissions, those kind of things. So people have come to us for that, and the first few passive houses that the practice, people in the practice have done have been that kind of thing. But we've been working with housing associations to develop social housing to Passivhaus Standard. And what their committees are really interested in is fuel poverty. So, there's a lot of people who are very educated in fuel poverty. So actually, the idea of Passivhaus to them has not been that difficult to grasp. The issue has been about how we deliver it and how we deliver it on targets and on benchmarks and on cost. So we've been doing a lot of work on that. And the delay, well, not the delay, the amount of time it's taken to get to that point has not been around people not understanding it. It's been around how can we build it at a budget.
Okay.
And now we're working on quite a lot of non-domestic projects. And they're councils that have declared climate emergencies, that have made, the committees have made quite big and bold decisions and have now been passed on to their officers to say, well, make this work and make it happen. So the officers in many cases have got themselves trained up and are very knowledgeable. And it's about now delivering something that the politicians have asked for, which is different to how we might have been operating 5 years ago, when the politicians weren't asking for that, and so it wasn't being delivered, if that makes sense, because that isn't what people are asking for. So I think there is quite a lot of knowledge about the standard and quite a lot of knowledge of the benefits of the standard, and it needs to seep into different bits of organizations to get the construction industry working. And the Green Party manifesto for, as you would expect, for the elections that happened on Thursday, the Green Party manifesto was that Passivhaus should be the basic standard for the building regulations in Scotland. So there's political will there in some parties.
And in term of cost, because you mentioned like you try to reduce cost as much as possible to be able to grab as much potential client to choose Passivhaus. How much is expensive? How much more is expensive compared to like traditional building?
I mean, we think we're somewhere between 5 and 8% over traditional of building regulations cost.
Okay.
It slightly varies from scheme to scheme. Got a couple of schemes that are a wee bit higher than that, but that seems to be in general where we are, and that is backed up by research by the Passivhaus Trust, which thinks between 4 and 8% across the UK is where Passivhaus costs are. So at the moment, as I say, I think we're towards the higher end of that, but we're hoping and working towards building more volume to be able to bring that cost down. We think volume is the next thing to help bring that cost down.
To bring it. And what about like return on investment? How long does it take? Because you say like you can reduce heating, so you reduce cost of the heating as well, so you can save money with that.
Yeah,
so
well,
the 8% can grab it.
There's two or three things that you have to take into account with that. There's firstly the energy that you might save on, and the cost of doing that. So particularly for councils doing their own public buildings, then reducing their revenue costs significantly is good. So that if you take that into account, then you might be between 15 and 20 years kind of payback period on the additional cost of Passivhaus versus the reduction in running costs year on year, which is good. That's great. But the other thing that I would, and we're saying is really important to take into account at the moment is that the government's committing to increasingly stringent targets for being net zero carbon, which to my mind says that any building that you build now, which isn't net zero carbon, you're going to have to retrofit in the next 20 years to be zero carbon. So you're going to save yourself the cost of retrofitting a building. So if you take that into account, then you reduce that payback further, because the cost of retrofitting a building is less. And the final thing I'd say is that I think that the quality of the construction and the quality of the components in a Passivhaus can allow you to stretch some of the traditional maintenance cycles out further. So you're using really good quality triple glazed windows, for instance, and really the M&E, the ventilation unit is tested and commissioned and is a good quality ventilation system. So Whereas before you might be replacing your windows after 15 years. Well, can you stretch that out to 20 actually? You know, these are good quality solid windows that we shouldn't be ditching them after 15 years. The MVHR system, well, perhaps that will last longer than a traditional system. And even if you eke that out by 5 years on those things, then it reduces your cycles over the lifetime of the building, and suddenly you find a chunk of money there as well. The flip side of that is there are some things that are different to normal buildings, so you do have to replace the MVHR filters every 6 months to a year, depending on the size of the system and the maintenance. So there is a cost there that you wouldn't have got. You wouldn't have in a traditional building.
And things to think about as well, doing like if you have to change like every 6 months the filter as well. Like if you're individual, maybe you're not used to do that with your building, so you need to do it or pay someone to do it.
Yeah, exactly. And then the last thing is just about how you value all of these things. Yes, the payback period. There is a payback period. Over the course of, so the Passivhaus Trust think that if you pay 8% extra for your Passivhaus compared to building regulation standard, after 30 years you will have saved 12% more money than using the building regulations, if you see what I mean. So it's saying it's saying the payback period is between 10 and 15 years.
Okay, not too bad.
Which, for a 60-year life of a new building should be good.
And if the building lasts longer as well,
exactly.
It's kind of
So yeah.
And what about Passivhaus and the Retrofit project? Is that something that exists? Or because you said like you need to retrofit your building in 20 years, can we retrofit our building in 20 years? Passivhaus, or is that something tricky?
Passivhaus has got a standard, a slightly different standard for retrofitting, because you can't get rid of all the thermal bridges in, say, the foundations of an existing building, because it's already there, and you can't jack a building up and stick insulation underneath it, because you're just not doing it, kind of thing. So it's got a slightly different standard, but it still has a really high performance, and certainly a lot better performance than many retrofit across the UK. And the complication with the Enefit is you've already got an existing building. It's got a shape, it's got it's got windows, it's got a function, it's got all the things of an existing building. So there's a lot more challenges in retrofitting, but we are working on a number of projects looking at retrofitting. We've got a project on site at the moment retrofitting a tenement in Glasgow, which I'm really excited about. That's going to be really interesting. Hopefully that's going to be done for COP 2026 and finished for then. So that'll be great. That's so we're doing that and looking at we're working with housing associations, looking at how we can retrofit up to Enefit standard. You've still got the benefit of getting rid of fuel poverty, and you've also got the benefit in rural areas where traditionally electric has been a really high cost form of heating. Because you've brought the heating down to such a small level, then you can get houses retrofit and working off an electric system without that penalty, if you like, fuel poverty risk. That's the idea. So yeah.
Okay. And you said like, so we know, so Passivhaus is from Germany and we use it a lot I know a lot in UK. I know also Canada and North America using a lot. But what about like, do you know if we can use it on hot climate?
So I don't know the exact detail of where all the projects are, but I do know that it's been used in most climate, if not all climate zones, and it's been used in every continent. There are some, it's got, for us in Scotland, the key issue is the heating load, but it's also got a cooling parameter, and it's got a maximum cooling load. So if you're in a hot climate, then you're then into techniques about reducing the cooling load down, because basically they're saying that everyone running off air conditioning, half the world running off air conditioning and half the world running off gas boilers is crazy. We need to bring that number down. So what you're doing in hotter climates is really designing to keep the building cool rather than designing for it to be heated. In Scotland, you've got to balance the heating and cooling, and here you still have quite a big overheating risk in the summer, and that overheating risk is only going to increase as the climate changes over the next 20 or 30 years. So we do calculations about overheating and design the windows to minimize overheating initially, and then look at how we get the energy balance between that and the heating in the winter. If you were working in a hotter climate, then you would just do that calculation, but in reverse.
Okay. Great. I didn't really know if it was used in hotter climate, but that's great. We can use it everywhere.
There's again, we're doing work down near London on a school, and the starting point there is very different to a school in Edinburgh or Perthshire or further north, because the climate's different, and they do have warmer, hotter summers with sunnier summers. So there's different calculations to do.
Different approach, yeah. Okay, great. And you mentioned, so for Passivhaus, to achieve Passivhaus, you need to focus on ventilation, insulation, solar gain, and other stuff. What are the maybe the three main components that have the most impact to achieve the Passivhaus standards?
But the first one that actually people don't really talk about that much is the shape of the building. What's really important is a thing called form factor, which is how much floor space you're creating for how much wall and roof and wall space. So if you imagine you've got the floor plan of your building and you've got 100 square meters, for instance, how much stuff do you need to enclose that? If you take it like a cardboard box and lay it out, how big is that shape? And minimizing that shape makes a really big difference. So the initial design that's done, on a sketch pad at the beginning of the project makes a really big difference to the efficiency of the building and to the cost of the building. And so getting that's really important to us. I think that's getting that in early on and getting that efficiency built in is really good. The next one, I've only got three things of her. Right, okay. Form's the first one. I think the insulation everyone knows about, but I think the issue for me on that really is that it's about keeping the insulation continuous and going all the way around, and not have any cold spots or any thermal bridges in that. And that's really, I think that's pretty tricky thing to do, particularly you've got interfaces that need a lot of people to be involved with. So the foundation to wall junction, you've got an engineer, you've got a timber kit guy, you've got there's maybe some drainage, water, services issues all around that as well. It's a really complicated junction to keep to get right, and that it's not just about the insulation, it's about getting it all the way around again. And it's the same with air tightness, bringing that all the way around and completing the circle. I think in quite a lot of the retrofits we've looked at, you can see that there's quite a lot of insulation on the outside of the building, but it's not continuous. It doesn't go all the way around. And we've modeled that, and you can lose 40% of your heat through the gaps, which, for the sake of 10% extra in cost, you're losing 40-50% of the heat through the gaps, which seems crazy to me. So the gaps are the thing. And the final thing I think is really important is getting it built right. It's the team on site and the communication with the team on site and making sure that they can build it easily and get the right sequence and get the thing done the right way and get that quality in there, if you like.
Okay.
Yeah.
Great.
Yeah.
That would be the three main.
I think so.
Part.
Yeah.
Yeah.
There's the form factor. There's wrapping it all the way around, and
Yeah.
there's building it. I think I'll go with that. Yeah.
Okay, great.
I mean, I could do
Brilliant.
3 sub ones if you
Okay.
like, but
We're gonna stick with that. There is this like saying as well, like because it's too airtight. Passivhaus Standard is too airtight. The air quality, indoor air quality, is not good. Is that true? Or I heard that a lot. Like, oh, I don't want to design. Like, Passivhaus is great, sure, blah blah blah, but like it's too airtight and the hair is too dry or it's too damp and you can't control it and it's hard to control.
the Germans have a saying that, and this came out of a Passivhaus course, is that natural ventilation is ventilation by chance, and we've undertaken and we've allowed others to undertake a lot of research on our projects and on other projects, and universally the indoor air quality with mechanical ventilation with heat recovery is excellent. That's across the board. The results are that is excellent. And comparing mechanical ventilation with heat recovery to natural ventilation, the difference is night and day. If you've got natural ventilation depends on people feeling stuffy and opening the windows. If you can feel that the air is stuffy, then it's already poor quality. So you get big spikes in air quality, and then people open the windows.
Yeah, that's why I'm wearing a thick jumper. I opened the windows this morning because I felt the air stuffy and I'm cold.
The mechanical ventilation. So the question for me is not really about the air tightness. It's about the quality of the ventilation system. If you've got a good quality ventilation system, you will get good quality ventilation. If you leave it to the occupant to make a decision based on what they're feeling, then you'll probably go get poor quality indoor air quality. We've also monitored a lot of buildings for retrofit, and what I can say without any doubt is that you can have a very leaky building that is not very airtight, that is incredibly energy hungry, and it can still have very poor air quality in it. So this whole thing about air tightness equals poor air quality is not right. The thing is, good ventilation equals good air quality. Poor ventilation equals poor air quality, and you can have air tightness isn't related to that in our view. You can have a poorly ventilated building that's got poor indoor air quality, and you can have a well ventilated building with very good indoor air quality. Does that make sense?
Yeah, no, absolutely. Yeah.
I say we've monitored quite a lot of ventilation systems. We've put different ventilation systems into quite a lot of different houses. Not all Passivhaus levels of air tightness, but improved. Things like in tenements in the west of Scotland, tenements have got quite poor air tightness, but improving the air tightness is often quite a lot better than putting insulation on stone, because insulating stone leads to other problems around moisture in stone and about spalling and about your freezing and things like that. Where does the water go and things like that? So you can do that relatively low impact. Obviously, it's better. The physics works better if you insulate things, but tenements and older buildings, a lot of the answers are in making the air tightness a bit better. And it drastically improves your energy performance without making any real change to indoor air quality.
So that can be good, like for retrofits.
Yeah.
Like improving. Yeah, that's one of the first things you.
Yeah.
would do.
And then as part of retrofit, I mean, we always say that you need to look at the ventilation as part of retrofit. I mean, the fact that, a building hasn't got very good ventilation, you know, doesn't mean that you should just leave it without very good ventilation. And quite a lot of houses have their trickle vents all blocked up or closed, and extract fans taped over and things like that. So you ventilation is its own thing. So that's always good to look at and make sure you get that right,
Okay,
irrespective of the air tightness.
okay. And following on air quality, does the Passivhaus Standard have like specification on materials to use to ensure air quality, or recommendation, or
No,
no?
the and I, you can make a passive house out of nuclear waste or cheese if you want. It
Okay.
doesn't specify what it is. It does specify the U value and the performance you've got to get to. So you can't make it out of Swiss cheese, but a nice dense cheese would But the it doesn't specify that. Its targets are all essentially energy, and they're
Okay.
building physics targets. Um, our view is that. Oh, and I would also say that because you've always got a mechanical ventilation system in Passive House, then the impact of some of the issues that you might traditionally think impact air quality is lessened now. So high VOC paints, and it doesn't go away at
Mm-hmm.
all. It doesn't completely go away. It's not saying that Passive House solves it. It just says that it's lessened because you've got good ventilation.
Okay,
But
it goes out of the house.
yeah, but we would
Building, yeah.
always work on reducing VOCs and reducing off-gassing materials in a building, because you know basically they can do some pretty horrible things. So we'd rather not have them in a building. That's
Mm-hmm.
yeah.
But Passivhaus doesn't specify anything
No,
specific about
yeah,
it. No. Okay.
you can build a passive house out of anything that you want, as long as you achieve the targets. That's
Okay.
and
Right.
and people have built it out of all sorts of stuff. That's
Okay. So it's just like a thermal value, and yeah,
yeah,
and following the rules.
yeah.
Great.
So I mean, I'm sure people have seen grand designs and various other things. You can build. There's quite a few passive houses on there, and they've built them
Mm.
out of insulated concrete formwork. They've built them out of steel. They've built them out of timber. Built them out of cross-laminated timber. But the difference in material terms between cross-laminated timber, for instance, and insulated concrete formwork, is quite substantial difference in the material properties. But that's
Mm-hmm.
fine as long as it achieves the U value. It's all right.
Okay.
Yeah.
Right. And so you're a Passivhaus certified designer. How do you get it? What do you have?
Just to be really clear, Hugo, my
Ah, sorry.
certification has lapsed, so I'm a passive house designer, but I'm not certified at the moment.
Oh, sorry.
Yeah,
Okay.
no, that's I do have to be clear, but that's
Okay, well, fair enough. Sorry, yes, my bad. So you were,
I was, yes, yeah,
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 you
yeah.
okay. So how did you do it?
Um, right. So, in order to be a passive house, a certified passive house designer, you need to take a course. When I did it, it was a 2-week course, and then you sit an exam, and it was a 3-hour exam. Um, it was about 2 weeks later, and that covers building physics, calculations, the different techniques, the sequencing, and all of the kind of skills that you need to build a passive house, and not to build a passive house, to design a passive house that can then get built competently. That's what you do. There's people from the office that are doing that at the moment, so they're doing part-time course over the course of 4 weeks, and then there'll be an exam at the end of it. But you do a course and you do the exam, and that gets you as designer. But there's other routes. There's other ways of getting involved. I mean, the Passive House Designer course is great, and it gives you a huge amount of knowledge. But you can do bite-sized training, or you can do there's a contractor course and things like that. There's just 2 days. A tradesperson course, sorry, there's just 2 days, and with just been working with the Construction Innovation Centre in Scotland, and they're now doing courses that are more bite-sized, 1 or 2 day courses to get people into the main parts of it, and then to develop experience over a period of time. So that's all good. Yeah.
Okay. Do you need to like be an architect or just is everyone can do the course?
Yeah. So in order to be a Passivhaus designer, you need to have a design qualification, but
Okay.
you can also be a Passivhaus consultant without a design qualification.
Okay.
I don't know what the details of the design qualification are, but I know an architect, you become a Passivhaus designer, whereas if you're not an architect, you can become a Passivhaus consultant.
Okay. Great.
Yeah.
Great. And can you certify your house like when you've done your building? How is
No,
it assessed?
you need a Passivhaus certifier to certify it, of
Okay.
which there are now, I think, 5 in the UK. So the designer designs it and does all the calculations to show that it gets to the Passivhaus level performance at design stage, and then you pass that to the certifier, who then says, well, this design is compliant with meeting the Passivhaus standard, and then you build the house, and then you have to evidence all of the aspects, all the performance aspects that are in the calculations. So, for instance, you need to get an air tightness test on completion. So the fact you've designed it to be an air tightness of 0.6 is not the thing. You need to get a certificate at the end that says it's been tested and the air tightness is 0.6.
Okay.
You need to install the MVHR and get someone to commission it and confirm the values and the ventilation system, and confirm that it's been installed correctly, but also confirm that it's been tested to meet the values that were in the PHPP. You need to prove that the insulation is the thickness that you said in the calculation. And so that might be through delivery notes or photographs, or so you have to provide evidence for all of these things, and only when you've provided the evidence do you get certification by
Great.
the certifier.
So that's why it's important to have good communication with your team who's building the building, because you can be certified at the design stage, but then after construction, if something goes wrong during the construction phase,
you don't get certification at design phase. It's just an indication that you're going to achieve the standard at the end. But all of the certification for Passivhaus is on the finished building.
Okay.
So that's how it's different to building regulations. Building regulations is on the design intent, and then it's mostly down to the design and construction team to ensure that you carry that intent all the way through. For Passivhaus, it isn't down to the design intent. It's entirely on the certification at the end and the performance at the end. So
so a bit more serious and like controlled. I would say, well, which is not bad. I mean, like, it's good things to follow the process until the end and certify it at the end would make more sense, and force people to do good job all the way. Great.
Well, it also means, from our point of view, it also means that things that get changed, things inevitably change during construction for various very good reasons, but it means that when they do get changed, they get changed for equivalent performance, and that the performance isn't lost through through changes that are made without a full understanding of what the impact of them are. So from an architect's point of view, that's a good level of control, if you like, and to ensure the quality of the building at the end of it.
So you've been using this standard for quite a while now, and do you have are you happy with it? Like, do you want to change something, or from a client point of view, do you have some good feedback from it?
Yeah, I mean, I think we've been looking at all of this for about 10 years, and I think we're now at the stage where around about half, is it reasonable to say around half of our workload is around Passivhaus and around that level of performance. We've also, about 5 years ago, we started a part of the practice that tested our buildings and spoke to the occupants afterwards to find out what they thought of the buildings and whether we could improve the design, either technically or the way we design or anything like that. So we've got a lot of feedback from residents and users of our buildings about what they like about the buildings. And it's clear that Passivhaus really improves people's quality of life over the previous standards that we were looking at. I mean, there's a difference there, and I think that's really important. I think to hear what people say about how they feel comfortable in a building is great. And that's not to say our buildings before were rubbish, not by a long stretch, But I think that extra bit really makes a difference to people, and we've learned a lot as a practice. We've learned a lot through doing that, and developed to move things on in our own practice to kind of make buildings better. So and that's all come really from this idea that that this kind of evidence-based design, this kind of idea that there's a lot of the construction of buildings which needs building physics has a real understanding a bit of building physics has a real impact on people and their experience of a building. And it's not to say you can design by numbers by any stretch of the imagination. There's still there's still the creative role of the architect in there to bring joy and a sense of place and excitement to a building. But understanding the building physics allows you to make that joy and sense of place happen in a building that works, which isn't that an architect's job? And so I think,
no, that's fair. Fair. And what stops? Do you think what stops people to use the Passivhaus Standard, like as an architect? Because not all of the architects are using it, and it sounds beautiful, but what would be the main challenge? Is it complicated, or
there's definitely an issue about is it for the geeks? Is it just for people who are really geeky about this stuff? I mean, I think feeling comfortable in a low a low energy building is pretty universal to me, but that's the thing. But I think we can get past that as an industry. People are good at different things. I do think there's less than there was. There's definitely a change in the industry about moving towards Passivhaus Standard buildings, whereas I think maybe 5 years ago, people would just have looked at you, nah, it's not for us, mate, and whatever. Whereas now, there are a lot of people talking about it, and a lot of people trying to get there, and a lot of people changing the way they do things in order to make things better. And I think that's really important. I think there's a little bit of the construction industry is not necessarily the most highly mechanized, highly research-led kind of industry in Scotland, and I think there's a resistance to change because of that. But change is coming, so you've either got to embrace it and get on with it, or risk being left behind. I think that's so. I think all of those things exist, and I think all of those things are slowly melting a bit. Certainly over the last 5 years, we've seen quite a big change. We've gone from looking at maybe 500 to 1,000 square meters of Passivhaus a year to, as I say, 25,000 plus square meters of buildings that are non-domestic, domestic, retrofit. It's just all sorts. So there's definitely an appetite for it.
Well, I think we're done with the question now. Would you like to add something else to finish? The Passivhaus, something you want to say?
I'm not sure.
Something you want to share with everyone?
I don't know. I think the main thing for me in Scotland is that there's clearly a growing number of people that have taken an interest in this. That clients, contractors, designers, politicians, all taken an interest, and I think there's a real momentum now. And I think if you're part of the construction industry in Scotland and are not taking the idea of building science or building physics, and Passivhaus, indoor air quality, reducing our carbon emissions, embodied carbon, all these things seriously, then I genuinely think you're going to be left behind. And I think it's a real shift in the industry, and I think it's going to be an exciting place to be over the next 5 to 10 years.
Hey guys, that's it for this episode. I hope you enjoyed it and that you learned a lot of new stuff about the Passivhaus Standard. If you're more interested about the Passivehaus, there is links in the description that will direct you to the Passivhaus Trust website, where there is a lot of resources on Passivhaus Standard, how to achieve it, and I think it's a brilliant way to start it. There is also a lot of books available about like how to design Passivhaus, so design book. Some of them are brilliant, and there is also a link to those books in the description. So don't be afraid, go have a look. And I'll talk to you next week. Bye bye, love you. Haha, you thought I forget about it. About the WIP bonus. And no, I didn't. So just to give you a bit of context, there is the COP26 coming in November 2021, and it's in Glasgow. This is a big event. This is huge for the UK. And so there is this challenge called the Ice Box Challenge. So the idea is pretty easy. You need to design 2 boxes which represent the house. And so one is with the Scottish building standards, and the other one follows the Passivhaus standards. And then you put 1 ton of ice in it, close it, and see how fast the ice melts in the building. So as this competition is for students or young professionals, that means we don't have that much experience regarding Passivhaus design, and even for Scottish building standards. So I thought that would be a good idea to ask Matt like his best advice for this challenge. So let's listen to his answer. And I got one more personal question. Is I'm doing the Icebox challenge with my classmate.
All right, superb. Yeah.
What tips do you have to give us?
What tips? Oh, right. Where do I start with that? I didn't mention COP in any of that. I mean, that's
you mentioned about the finishing your retrofit building before COP26.
Yeah, but I mean, COP's coming. That's a really big thing for the construction industry. Particularly needs to sit up and take note of that. But the Iceberg Challenge, I think, I'm looking forward to seeing the entries for this, because I think all of what if we talked previously about architects who think, Passivhaus is just boxes and it's just efficient kind of things. Well, I think things like the Iceberg Challenge will show the level of creativity that can go into just a box. That's you're not even housing a person; you're housing some ice. That's but I think you've got to think about how you're going to wrap that completely. I think that's all of the tricky junctions. Take on the tricky bits of your design, and take them head on, and see how you would work out the tricky bits, and let that tell you how to deal with the rest of it. If you see what I mean, that's what I would.
Okay, yeah, I see what I mean.
Yeah.
To wrap it airtight and insulation everywhere.
Yeah, and allow that to. Perhaps allow that to dictate how you deal with the rest of it. That's
okay.
I don't know. I genuinely don't have a massive insight into that, but it's going to be great, and I'm going to really look forward to seeing what the results are.
That's going to be fun. We're having good fun right now designing it, so
good.
So it's good challenge. I like it. Well, that's it for me.
The other thing, Hugo, on that is that how can you engage people in the idea of this? I think that's that's an important thing for me. It's for the public to engage in the idea of energy efficiency. I think the idea of a big bit of ice slowly melting is quite engaging, but what can the architecture do to help with that engagement and understanding, and the impact that's going to have over the whole of Scotland? I mean, that's
how to make people to understand what it's all about.
Yeah, that's it.
Through a block of ice in box and box with a block of ice. Just an outdoor fridge. Well, perfect. Thank you very much. That was brilliant. Thank you for the opportunity for the interview.
Great. No worries. Thank you very much.
That was amazing. Thank you.
Any questions? Yeah, thanks.